Hello and welcome back to the Nutrition Digest podcast. We are your hosts and registered dietitians. I'm Tara Valenti.
I'm Alicia Kugler.
And I'm Summer Merrick.
We are here to dish up the nutrition tea, to debunk the myths, to inspire, to inform, and hopefully entertain you, maybe just a little. Today, we are going to dive headfirst into one of the most polarizing topics in nutrition. We're talking all about dairy today. I am very excited about this topic. I get asked about this a lot. I know Summer and Alicia, you get asked about it a lot as well. It's a very hot topic. There's a lot of misinformation out there on dairy. It's the OG canceled food. It's blamed for everything from acne to inflammation, but also touted as a key source of calcium and protein. So we hear a lot of people recommending to consume dairy, particularly in terms of bone health. So what is the truth? Should you be cutting dairy out of your diet? Is dairy toxic or is it a dietary staple? So let's break that all down. But before we dive in, I just want to ask how your New Year's went, because this is our first time talking after 2026 has started. And I'm just like curious, do you guys have a good New Year's?
What'd you do, Alicia?
We went for a nice dinner with my parents and Rez's parents, and then long walk outside in the frigid temperatures and played board games. It was a really good time. And actually we found this card game that I'm going to have to show it to you both at some point. And it's very Canadian. It's Taco Puck Maple Syrup Canoe. What? And it's the most Canadian thing that you could possibly find for all the Canadian listeners out there. If you want something to like impress your foreign friends, get this card game and then just a good laugh.
Yeah, you're going to have to share it with us. I don't even know what to say. Like, I mean, it sounds fun. And I'm getting way into playing games again. So we played some games as well. We had a pretty low key New Year's. Just some friends got together. We prioritized Anderson Cooper and Andy Cohen on CNN.
Did Anderson Cooper get like very drunk this year? Because I think I saw a headline about that.
I mean, he was drunk, but not like Andy Cohen. Like he did some highbrow like giggling, which was pretty cute. He looks very, shy and whatever. Anyway, we had a great time. Same thing, just had some food, had some really yummy margaritas, and then walked home because we all live in the same neighborhood. But we were home by, I don't know, 10:30. It was great.
Very different weather where you were than where I was.
It was raining though.
Pouring. Yeah. We went up to Guerneville, which is, if you haven't been, it's like the most adorable town up north in the Redwoods. It's super cute. We went with a couple of our friends, got a cabin. My husband's birthday is New Year's Day. So New Year's Eve is kind of a thing for us because we're double celebrating two holidays. So we went there, we got like a hot tub and it was awesome. Like we arrived, it was pouring rain. It was super gloomy and like beautiful and misty. And we opened the door to our B&B and the fire was lit. It was
wow.
Like, so cute. And
that sounds really nice.
My husband and I made homemade ravioli to cook for everybody. And we did I did a Sicilian citrus salad to start. And then I made this olive oil cake that was so good.
I saw your stories and I was like, Tara, can we make this gluten-free somehow? We need to figure out the recipe.
I'm sure that's doable. Because in the instructions, it said or gluten-free flour of choice. So I'm sure we could try to do a gluten-free version of it.
Yeah, if you guys want some really good food porn, check out Tara's Instagram because, oh my gosh, the food you make looks incredible.
Yes.
Thank you. It's a passion of mine. Well, I'm glad we all had it sounds like a fun New Year's and did some cool stuff and played some games and didn't go too crazy, but that's how it is nowadays. We don't go crazy anymore.
No. I'm not 19 anymore.
No. And I wouldn't want to be. So let's talk a little bit about dairy. There was a bit of dairy in the frosting that I put on my olive oil cake.
Dun, dun, dun.
It was superb. I can never say it right. And I think everyone mispronounces this. Mascarpone.
Mm-hmm. Mascarpone?
Mascarpone.
I love a whipped cream from mascarpone. Mascarpone.
I think
I just did that too.
And whatever. I can't say it. But yes, amazing.
It was so good. I made a I'm going to say this wrong, but an apple tartatan.
Ooh, that sounds good.
Not okay.
How do you say it?
I don't know. How do you spell it?
Tartatan. Tartetin.
Tartine?
It's like that French apple dessert.
Not a tartine.
But it's like tartatan. Yeah, but it's like that, whatever. Made a mascarpone, whatever, whipped cream for that. And then also on my niece's birthday, which we celebrated on Christmas Day, I have this go-to chocolate cake. That's a chocolate cake with a mascarpone, hazelnut brittle crunch frosting.
Yum.
And then you do some chocolate chips and orange zest in the food processor on the top. Super good.
That sounds so fancy.
Yeah, it does sound really fancy. But I definitely can say that we all love dairy products from this conversation. We also all have like a little bit of a sweet tooth from the conversation. But I definitely think that we're all like on the dairy train, at least for our own nutrition. And I think that kind of like leads us to like, why are we having today's episode? What is so controversial about dairy? I think for a lot of us, we go onto good old social media and we see all the influencers being like, dairy is inflammatory. It's not meant for humans. Well, there's a reason why we are the only mammals that drink milk after the age of 2.
Or they go polar opposite and they're like, you gotta drink raw milk.
Oh my God.
Totally.
Oh no.
Which like, just to make it very clear, we are against that and do not drink raw milk, but we won't go there right now.
Yeah.
And that's a really good point right away, is that it's really hard to figure out if dairy is good for you, if it's not good for you. Also, what is bad, quote unquote, about dairy? Do you have lactose intolerance? What's the difference between that and a food allergy or a milk allergy? What are the different symptoms? There's just so much noise. So hopefully we can kind of shed some light and make it a little more clear, so you, the listener, has more tools in your arsenal to decide how you want to go with this.
And I will say that we're coming from the lens of a dietitian and like fitness professionals. I know I've had great debates with clients about information they've gotten from other practitioners. And there is certain practitioners, naturopaths, that are taught early in their education that all clients should cut out dairy from the get-go of working with you to solve all their problems. And I personally have issues with this because I grew up on a dairy farm. And you know what? There is people that don't tolerate dairy. And I will say that. So it's just kind of like, we're going to sort through kind of some of the noise, some of the evidence, and what those big ticket items are.
One thing I also want to add too is we're talking more about the actual health implications here and safety implications, not so much the moral and ethical side of things. If you're somebody that doesn't consume dairy for those reasons, that's something that we fully understand and totally respect that choice.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I know even from like a climate impact as well. I know some people choose not to have any animal products, and we're totally here to support them.
So let's talk about the evidence-based benefits of dairy.
I had a client this morning that I was lecturing her about her bone health. Her bone density is really low, and she has a lot of issues with like, she's young still. So she's in her 20s, and I'm like, let's try to be a little more consistent. She has no issues with dairy. And I'm like, let's try to like up that dairy intake to help with the bone density, because it is the most efficient food source for calcium, vitamin D, if it's fortified, phosphorus, and protein. And so there's such strong evidence to support its role in preventing osteoporosis and helping to support bone mass and strength across the lifespan. And like, especially for this individual who's in her early 20s and she's a female, where they're at risk for osteoporosis later in life if she doesn't get her bone density up. And so for many of the clients trying to meet their calcium and mineral goals, adding the dairy products in can be very, very beneficial. And I know there's a lot of controversy to a whole separate topic, but we can just touch on it very briefly around calcium supplementation in individuals that are not having dairy products.
Which is super, super interesting. I will say on the note of bone density too, 2 things. One, if you are a younger person and you're listening to this right now, bone density is something that gets much more difficult to fix as you get older, particularly like after age 30. It starts to get significantly more difficult to increase bone density. So this is something that needs to be paid attention to now. I wish I paid closer attention to it when I was younger. My bone density sucks, and it's something that is very concerning to me. So that's actually a reason that I consume dairy every single day, typically more than once a day, partially just to get that calcium and those minerals in.
Yeah. And if you are even a little bit older, you're in your perimenopausal years for women, or just an adult male who's over a certain age, say 50s, 60s, 70s and beyond, osteoporosis is a real thing. And it is just like what Tara said, it's really hard to reverse that. So especially us ladies, as we get into those peri and postmenopausal years, our bone density actually significantly decreases. So we really, really want to do our best to combat that before it happens. Mm-hmm. So, these are the support for having calcium. And again, milk being such a great source of that calcium.
Right. There's also the issue of the type of protein that we get from dairy. And this is another reason when I talk to people who say they're vegetarian, the first question I ask them is, what about dairy? Because I want to know what we're working with in terms of protein sources. Greek yogurt, cottage cheese, these are great ways to get protein in the diet. Whey protein especially is fast digesting. It's rich in leucine, which is excellent for muscle repair and muscle growth. So if you're somebody who, well, we should all be paying attention to our muscle mass, but if you're really trying to focus on muscle mass, maybe trying to build muscle mass or just maintain it as you age, consuming dairy is a really great way to get leucine in, which is very supportive of that. Casein is slow digesting, which is helpful for muscle preservation overnight. So if you're consuming dairy products, let's say in the evening before bed, that can be a great strategy to support muscle recovery after a hard workout so that you're getting your gains that you've worked so hard for the following not necessarily the following day. It's not going to show up the next day, but you know what I mean.
Yeah. I remember like back from my bodybuilding days that it was like all the bodybuilding coaches were like, you have to have casein protein. It has to be in a shake format right before you go to bed. That's how you're going to make the gains. That's how you're going to see the biggest changes in your body composition. I'm like, yes, there's definitely some belief in that, but it's just funny how the bodybuilding community loves casein in that sense.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's kind of the cherry on top, right? Like, not everyone needs to be consuming casein like right before bed. But if you are really focusing on building muscle mass, that could be a strategy to help support that process. So what about people that are cutting out dairy? Because this is really common. I talk to people every day who tell me they're cutting out dairy for various reasons. And we have this whole conversation about why that may or may not be the right thing for them to do. So let's dive into that topic.
Yeah, I think the main thing that I see in my practice, at least, and I think probably the same for both of you, is people cut out dairy because their insides are unhappy with them. Yeah. They have some symptoms, whether it's related to IBS or whether it's true lactose intolerance. For some people, it's a milk protein allergy. I don't know if either of you have this, but I have a lot of clients that they come in and I ask about food allergies and they're like, I'm allergic to dairy. And then we get talking more and I'm like, oh, no, you're lactose intolerant. You're not allergic to dairy. Those are two very distinct things. Like lactose intolerance means you are not able to break down the lactose enzyme and you get a lot of like gas, bloating, diarrhea, unpleasant gut stuff. Sometimes we can see just not a happy time. And that versus like a milk protein allergy is like a true immune response. And it affects a much smaller amount of the population versus lactose intolerance. And even going back to the lactose intolerance, for a lot of people that are lactose intolerant, it's not all dairy products. Usually the higher fat milk products sit okay. So they can have some cheese. They can have some lactose-free dairy products. Certain fermented dairy products like yogurts, kefir usually are not a big problem. Obviously, it's a dose response. If you're going to go and have like a ton of cheese and a ton of yogurt and all these things, the amount you have is going to build up over time and cause issues. Versus people that have like the milk protein allergy, it's a zero-sum game. Like they can't have any dairy products.
Yeah. And one of the things to note too, if you're not sure if you have one or the other or any, often if you have lactose intolerance, you have symptoms pretty quickly after you have that dairy product. And like Alicia said, it's mostly abdominal or gassy, stomach related, diarrhea, that kind of stuff. But it will often go away once you stop eating it or after a short period of time. Whereas a milk allergy, you'll see some of these symptoms come up less as gut issues, but more things like muscle and joint pain, rosacea, you may have brain fog, acne, eczema. And that's why a lot of people, when you go to a dermatologist, they'll often recommend that you cut out dairy. That's one of the first things I always get told if I go to the dermatologist for any skin issue. It's, have you cut out dairy?
Alicia, didn't you hear something?
Yeah, I actually looked into the evidence for this, and there's actually no evidence that cutting out dairy can help with like skin issues from an acne perspective. If you have a dairy milk allergy, and that's where a lot of the times the exclusion is coming from, is if you have a true milk allergy, we can see a skin reaction, but it's more like a rash. And so I was actually talking to a dermatologist that works in SF about a month ago, because I was having a lot of skin issues myself. And I asked him, like, should I be cutting out dairy? Because a lot of my clients come to me saying this. And he's like, there's actually no evidence that cutting out dairy can help with dermatitis or like acne, that it's more has to do if you have a milk protein allergy that you would cut it out.
What's interesting is, and I feel like this is fairly common with a lot of different sensitivities, sometimes people just have their own individual unique thing going on. Like I have a client who, and this doesn't necessarily rule out everything, right? But she was having a lot of serious skin issues, and she was like, you know what, maybe I'll try to cut out dairy. And it seemed to be effective for her. So sometimes it is case by case. And even though we don't have studies that show, you know, this works for everybody across the board, or they're not statistically significant or whatever, that doesn't necessarily mean that an individual won't feel better if they cut it out personally. So I always encourage people, like, if you feel like it might be something that is causing issues for you, experiment, you know?
Totally.
It can't hurt to try cutting it out. Make sure that's the only thing you try at, you know, like we need it to be isolated so we can identify that that's the thing. But it can't hurt to just experiment with some of these things and see if maybe for you it does benefit.
Everyone's different. And like, it might also be that like, hey, maybe it's not that the dairy protein is the direct cause of the skin issues, but maybe there's some digestive stuff going on too. And the irritation of the gut is then causing the skin issue, or we're having some malabsorption because of the gut being pissed off from the dairy products, that it's indirectly causing the skin, that it might be another vicious loop or another feedback that's happening. Or like in the case of like SIBO, small intestinal bacterial overgrowth, maybe lactose is something that's feeding the bacteria and then it's getting back. And that SIBO in itself can cause a lot of skin issues for a lot of people. And there's more and more evidence coming out that a lot of like IBS and like certain other symptoms in the body could be related to SIBO, and it's being underdiagnosed quite a bit. That's a whole other topic for a different day that I could ramble about, but I'm not going to ramble about. I definitely think that, yes, there's always going to be outliers to the like, their dairy doesn't do anything for your skin. And I think that that's something that, yeah, experimenting is, you kind of have to listen to your body.
Yeah. And you know who can help you with this if you have questions about digestion, and maybe if you have any issues with your gut? A dietitian. Who would have thunk? So yeah, if you do have any questions, you may want to consider speaking to a dietitian. I know 3 that are sitting right here, so reach out anytime.
So the last kind of like health thing that you have maybe heard about that is related to more this side of things before we get talking about inflammation, which is a whole other topic, is hormones and cancer concerns, and kind of sort of like, oh, dairy is going to cause cancer, all of that you may have heard that. And we're going to dive into this a little bit more when we talk about specific hormones that are found in dairy products in a little bit. But there is other natural hormones that are happening in milk because they are mammals, but there is no strong evidence linking moderate dairy consumption can cause hormone-related cancer, kind of similar to soy products. I know we've talked about this in previous episodes. Everyone's like, oh my gosh, soy has hormones, it's going to give me cancer. That's not how it works. I wish there was like a cause and effect like that we could kind of identify, but there's not. There is this IGF-1, which is a hormone that is sometimes linked to prostate cancer and excess, but there's so much debate and controversy, we don't necessarily have a clear cause and effect. And so I think dairy gets a lot of like scapegoat blaming for a lot of complex issues like digestion and hormones and skin and cancer. But that doesn't necessarily mean that it's the root cause. And everyone's so individual that kind of using those blanket statements can be problematic.
Right.
So speaking of evidence, let's talk about that.
Inflammation, the big one that I think is like circulating the most on the interweb.
Yeah, okay. I think inflammation is something that people are generally confused about. I have a lot of people come to me and just say, I feel inflamed. Inflammation is not typically something that you can feel. Unless it's acute, if you cut your arm and it gets red and hot because your immune system and you're getting blood flow to that area and stuff, you can feel that inflammation. But the inflammation that we're talking about when we say my body feels inflamed is typically chronic and low grade, and you're not going to feel that inflammation. So you might be feeling something else. And usually when I hear people say they feel inflamed, they are bloated. That is what they are feeling. Or maybe they have some fluid retention. Maybe they've been consuming excess sodium and they're retaining some water, and they might be like puffy in the face and stuff. Or maybe they've been consuming too much alcohol and they're feeling those things from that as well. That is not necessarily technically inflammation. So we want to be clear about the difference between those things. So dairy and inflammation, what have you guys been hearing from your clients? What does the evidence say about this topic?
Well, I hear from my clients all the time exactly what you said, and I see it on social media all the time. I feel inflamed. If you feel inflamed, you are inflamed. If you're having this and this and this, you're inflamed. And that's not necessarily what it means. There's no actual pro-inflammatory effect of dairy on healthy individuals. And that's what several meta-analyses are showing. It's just not proven. There's very, very little inflammatory, if any, effect that dairy has on the body.
And so noting again, healthy individual.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a good point. And again, it doesn't mean that you may have lactose intolerance. You could be lactose intolerant. You may have a milk allergy. But dairy in itself, if you are a healthy individual, is not going to be inflammatory. Also, there's certain foods like yogurt and kefir that may actually be anti-inflammatory. They may help us combat inflammation within the body, with the probiotics and things like that are in, or healthy bacteria that are in these products. They can actually help combat inflammation.
Isn't that funny? Here, so many people are just believing that dairy is inflammatory. Like I get asked this so often, and it's almost just taken as fact. Like some people just believe that this is just the way it is. And in fact, in many cases, it's the opposite. It can actually help to reduce inflammation. Like how wild is that? So I hope that this podcast gets through to some people who are confused about dairy and inflammation. And like we said, if you have a condition that makes you sensitive to dairy, that might be a different story. But for the rest of us who are totally okay with and can digest dairy, it can be very beneficial to your health.
So what about autoimmune conditions like MS or RA, so multiple sclerosis or rheumatoid arthritis? They may be conditions where you may want to trial removing dairy. Research isn't conclusive, but that's something to talk with your healthcare professional about or your dietitian. Those are conditions, again, that we've seen some benefit where removing dairy could be helpful, potentially. But again, we're not sure. It could be another reason altogether. Jury's still out.
So my aunt, she has rheumatoid arthritis, and it's interesting because I know she's had multiple doctors over the years tell her to remove dairy products. And part of it was that they were actually saying that dairy could interact with some of the immunosuppressant medications that she's on. And so for some individuals, it's like, what medications are they on to actually help their immune system? And is there any sort of interaction with dairy products too? Because I know for some individuals, there is interactions with medications that they do have to kind of be aware of. I guess we didn't really have this in our show notes, but this just came to my brain that I'm like, oh, think about like, say, for example, if you're someone that's anemic and you're trying to like have tons of iron, like dairy is going to prevent the absorption. So if you're someone that you're trying to get your iron levels up and you're really annoyed because no matter what you do, it's not going up, well, maybe being mindful about when you're having dairy products or like calcium rich foods and like when you're taking your iron supplement too. So little plug there. The next topic that we're going to be diving into is very dear and near to my heart, just because I actually grew up on a dairy farm in Eastern Ontario in Canada. So I've been surrounded by like kind of like how dairy products are to be, but this is in Canada. And even my father, he works for the Ontario Ministry of Agriculture and Food and Rural Affairs. So he works a lot on the regulatory side in terms of food safety and the products that are being taken to the public. And I will say, like, he and I have had some very heated conversations since me coming to the US about regulations in Canada versus the US surrounding dairy products. And basically, this is like one of the food products that there is such a substantial difference. Canada, the US of, yes, there's some food additives, which we can talk about on a different day, but like dairy products in terms of like the raw agricultural product, there is a lot of difference. And this particular hormone, RBST is the main difference in Canada versus the US. So Tara, if you want to take it away.
Yeah, I was really excited to talk about RBST as well because it's something that you see on dairy labels quite often. And the messaging that you read is kind of puzzling when you see it on the labels here in the US anyway. So I wanted to talk about what RBST is. You might have seen it on your milk or dairy products. And typically what it says is that it comes from cows not treated with RBST. That's usually what you see is like, this is a product that comes from a cow that was not treated with RBST. And so the natural question is like, wait, what is RBST? And what about these other products that don't say that? So RBST stands for recombinant bovine somatotropin, which is, it's basically a synthetic growth hormone that they inject into dairy cows, and it causes those cows to significantly increase milk production. So if we're thinking about dairy farms and probably typically more like your factory farms that are trying to mass produce milk, which is most of the milk that we're seeing on the shelves at stores, that would be something that they would consider using because they are trying to make as much milk as possible for the consumer so they can make their money. It's actually a lab-created version of a natural hormone that cows produce. That's just the BST. And they make it by genetically engineering bacteria to produce the synthetic hormone. So they have this bacteria that produces that hormone, and then they use it to inject it into the cows, and then it's Milk City. When we consume it, it is broken down by our digestive tract similarly to natural BST, the natural stuff that we find in milk that's produced by cows normally. And because of that, the FDA has approved it in the US, but it's banned in many other countries. So that is unique to the US. We allow it to be used in some of our farms, but in places like Canada, this is something that has been banned, and there is some debate over its safety, and that's why we're seeing the labels pop up that say, hey, these cows weren't treated with RBST. It's basically marketing to be like, hey, this stuff doesn't have that synthetic hormone, so if you're afraid of that or worried about that, this is a good product for you to buy because we don't use that stuff. Interestingly, because of all of this hype and controversy over RBST, a lot of dairy farms in the US have stopped using it. Since the 90s, it's decreased by about half of what it used to be in its peak. So we're just not seeing it used as much anymore as it used to be. But the FDA doesn't require that it's labeled that a farm is using it. So you don't have to put that, oh, these cows were treated with RBST on the label, but you can voluntarily do it, or you can voluntarily put, hey, these cows were not treated with RBST. So it's kind of like up to the company that's producing the milk to decide what they want to put on their label and what they want to put into their cows. So as a consumer, if this is something that you are concerned about, if it's something that you don't want to consume, look out for foods that are labeled as these cows were not treated with RBST, and you will not be consuming that. If it does not have that label, it's a big question mark. We don't actually know because it's optional whether or not they put that on there. As far as I could read, humans break down the synthetic hormone similar to the natural hormone that we would be consuming in cow's milk. And so there isn't a concern based on what I've seen, but it does make some people feel uneasy because it is a synthetic hormone and it does change the way that those cows are producing milk.
Part of the controversy too is, like, I know in some evidence it's been shown to cause premature puberty in some young females. So like there was some link there that they were showing about RBST, like puberty as early as like 6 or 7.
Is that
in young girls? It's
though?
not conclusive. It's not conclusive. And this was studies back from like the 90s to early 2000s that it's like, is it that or is it something else in the food system too? Again, we don't actually understand, but it's interesting how other countries in the world have banned it.
That kind of concludes the RBST. Take with that what you will in terms of the information there. But I want to also talk about saturated fat that comes from dairy versus saturated fat that comes from other animal foods. The reason I wanted to talk about this is because I overheard a person who shall not be named, who...
It was not one of us.
It was not one of us, no. This person was not a dietitian or even close to one. And they were talking about how it's okay to eat loads and loads and loads of full fat dairy products because the fat in dairy products is okay. It's healthy. It's okay to eat. And I was like, I feel like you're taking something that you read and really blowing it up and taking it to an extreme.
Refer back to episode 1 or podcast 1 for who to listen to for
nutrition advice.
Spoiler alert. Big muscles do not equal credentials. So I wanted to talk a little bit about this because there is some research on this topic, and we want to be informed about the decisions that we make when it comes to saturated fat intake. With my clients, saturated fat intake is something that we track. I always give people a saturated fat target. It's something that we want to pay attention to because excessive saturated fat consumption in the diet is concerning. We know what the research says about excessive saturated fat consumption as a whole. What the research does show when they've looked at consumption of saturated fat from dairy products versus from other animal products is that it's complicated. Saturated fat in dairy products comes in a complex food matrix. So it's not isolated. It's not just bare saturated fat in a little fat globule. It's in a food matrix with calcium, with bioactive fatty acids. It's in a milk fat globule membrane. So it has a different package, let's say, than saturated fat coming from somewhere else. The studies have shown that dairy fat doesn't necessarily impact cardiovascular or inflammatory risk the same way that saturated fat coming from processed meats and isolated saturated fats does. So there may be a difference there, but they're not clear on exactly why, and it's still being researched. Cheese and yogurt specifically had been shown to have a neutral or protective association with cardiometabolic health. So there's another plug for yogurt because we love yogurt over here. Butter, on the other hand, behaves more like other isolated fats. This suggests that basically the food form matters more than the fat content alone. So if you are, and this kind of goes in line with what we recommend generally, if you're consuming saturated fat in the form of sausage and bacon and lots of butter and processed meats, we know it is well established that those foods do harm if overly consumed. What the studies have shown is that it's possible that if you're consuming saturated fat from dairy products, except butter, you might not be at as high of a risk for cardiac symptoms, let's say. So something to take into consideration when you're choosing the foods that you're putting into your diet. Should we still be mindful of our total daily saturated fat intake, even if it's all coming from dairy? Yes, we should. Total saturated fat intake is something that we should absolutely be mindful of. I think at the end of the day, it's diet quality that we're looking at here.
I have heard it a couple times just as an argumentative sake. Well, if we're trying to cut down some of those foods, such as the processed meats, things like that, butter, that very obviously have negative impact. And then, some people will come back with, well, what about saturated fat from milk? So it comes up.
Yeah. One of the questions that I get asked a lot is people are under the impression that they should be eating full fat dairy products. Somebody out there, some influencer, whatever, said, oh yeah, you got to have full fat dairy. It's way better for you for whatever reason. And it's not necessarily that it's bad for you to be consuming full fat dairy. It's just that you have to take your priorities into consideration. When I'm looking at my dietary pattern throughout the day, I have a tendency to eat a lot of fat. There's just a lot of fat in my diet. I eat a lot of nuts and seeds and avocado and olive oil. Sometimes I'll have red meat that adds more saturated fat in there. So I'm looking at my saturated fat intake as a whole, and I want to make sure that I'm not going over my daily totals. And if I can make easy swap outs to reduce my total saturated fat intake and give me a little bit more wiggle room, I'm going to do that. So I usually go for a 0% or a 2% or a lower percentage dairy product when I can to make room for those other sources of saturated fat that are probably going to get sprinkled in throughout my day, like cheese or whatever the heck else.
Mm-hmm. I do the same thing.
Yeah. And the other thing too is let's prioritize the fats that we know are good for us. So if I'm going to have a 0% fat Greek yogurt, I'm going to add chia seeds. I'm going to add flax seeds. I'm going to add some nuts. This is full of omega-3s. It's full of fats that we know are actually going to benefit our health, not a saturated fat that may or may not be neutral. So I think it's about prioritizing what foods you want to keep and what foods you want to minimize.
And that's the same thing we're not also saying on the other end. Go ahead, have 0% fat dairy, and then go load up on pepperoni and sausage. It's not that way either. You still do want to prioritize, like what you said, quality of food over just the numbers specifically. We're not just going so granular that we're only looking at the numbers and having to hit every macro, and then it doesn't matter what you're eating to get there. That's not what we're saying at all.
Right. And when it comes to saturated fat, just to throw some numbers out there for y'all, 10% of your daily calories should be coming from saturated fat or less, 10% or less. So that's easy math. Think about how many calories you're consuming each day, calculate 10%. It's kind of hard to stay under that number. So you do have to be thoughtful and strategic about saturated fat intake and where it's coming from, and prioritizing the foods that are maybe a little bit lower in saturated fat so that you can stay within your targets. So let's quickly dive into ultra pasteurized dairy, because I get asked about this one as well pretty regularly. So I just want to explain what that is. Sometimes people are concerned and they think it's the same thing as like ultra processed foods, and it's definitely not the same thing. Ultra pasteurized dairy just refers to milk or dairy products that have been heated to a higher temperature than standard pasteurization. So they're just heating it up to a higher temperature. The reason that they do this is because it extends shelf life and it helps with food safety. So you're killing more microbes when you do this than you would heating it up to a lower temperature, which kills some microbes. So pretty much that's what it is. Like, it's pretty straightforward. Like I said, it does help with shelf life. Your milk will last longer. Sometimes you will see ultra pasteurized foods that don't need to be refrigerated, for example, which I know always feels a little bit sketchy and confusing, but they do use a specific technique to make it so that it will last longer and it is safe to consume. So you'll see like shelf stable milk in aseptic cartons, for example. Nutrition wise, there is no difference here. Like, it's very, very minimal. The protein is unchanged. Calcium and minerals are unchanged. The temperature does not impact those. The fat amount is exactly the same. The only thing that's impacted is B vitamins, which might be ever so slightly reduced, but it's basically a negligible amount. So I would say don't worry about it. It's not a big deal. It doesn't really change the product much at all. If anything, it's a safer product to consume and it's going to last longer in your fridge.
Have you guys had any of that? Like, is the taste different? I would assume it would taste different.
I haven't noticed a taste difference. Some people report that it does taste like kind of cooked. Like, there's a little bit of caramelization that occurs, or like, the Maillard reaction that we learned about back in our food science. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So like that happens, but it's such a tiny amount that, I mean, if you're like really taste sensitive, you might notice, but I don't notice it.
And then what about in a coffee? Like, can you tell a difference? Like,
I doubt that you'd be able to taste it in a coffee.
I don't notice the difference at all in a coffee.
No.
Some people are very particular about what milk is in their coffee.
I feel like it's more common in Europe, because I have a very weird recollection of being at my tri-camp in May in France, and them just having like cartons of milk sitting in their garage, and they didn't have anything in the fridge. And even after they opened it, they would put it in the fridge. But it was very weird to me that I'm looking around and I'm like, it's 30 degrees Celsius or like in the 80s and 90s Fahrenheit. And I'm like, why is the milk not in the fridge? They didn't have to be in the fridge. So it's just like very mind boggling to me, because I'm used to dairy has to be in the fridge.
Yeah, totally.
They sell it at Costco too. You'll see like massive cartons of milk for kids. It's like marketed toward kids, and it's just out, not refrigerated.
Yeah. Interesting. So on to our last topic. Let's talk a little bit about dairy versus dairy alternatives. Like, what's the difference? What are different kinds? What's the different amount of protein in them?
Yeah, I would say like there's three main groupings. So the first grouping I would say is the one that we see most common that people use, which is almond milk, oat milk, and rice milk. So these are I feel like coffee shops, people have them at home. They taste good. The big thing you have to kind of note about these is they're often a lot lower in protein, and you have to be really careful, because not all three of these are fortified with calcium and vitamin D, and naturally they don't have any calcium or vitamin D, versus something like a soy milk, which is going to be nutritionally closest to a cow's milk, and it is fortified naturally. Pretty much, I think all soy milks are fortified, but naturally they would have calcium in it. I know for a lot of my clients that have severe lactose intolerance or a dairy allergy, I usually recommend they have the soy milk so they get the calcium and the protein in as an easy source. Or my vegans out there, they'd be like, hey, go for soy milk. You're going to get a little more protein in there. You're going to get your micronutrients. And then the last one is your coconut milk. I would also say like macadamia milk, which is one that I'm seeing a lot more at coffee shops now, which is super tasty. So it's going to be a little bit higher in fat versus the almond, oat, and rice milk are going to be a lot lower in fat and lower in protein. They're going to be a little bit more carb based versus the coconut milk and the macadamia. It's going to be a little bit higher in fat, lower in protein. But again, you have to double check that they have that fortification there because it's not always fortified. You also have to be mindful that plant milks, usually they have like a lot of guar gum and xanthan gum and agar and things like that added to it. Yeah, carrageenan and oils and things like that added to them, sometimes even sweeteners. So I have a lot of clients that are like very conscious of their sugar intake, and then they're having a bunch of plant-based milk, which is sweetened regularly. And I'm like, okay, maybe we need to look at this a little bit more. And you have to be careful too, because they don't have a lot of calcium. So when you're out shopping for your dairy alternative, if that's the direction you go in, which is totally fine, just make sure you're getting at least 8 grams of protein per serving. I know I'm seeing more and more almond milks, almond cashew milks at the grocery store that are fortified with protein. The other one that's been around forever is Ripple. I think it's pea protein milk, and that one is higher protein per serving. And then you want to make sure it's fortified with calcium, so at least 300 milligrams, and that there's not a lot of sugar or oil added to it.
And if you have a sensitive gut, you might want to be especially picky when looking at the additives that are put into these products, like the gums and the emulsifiers and stuff, because some of those can be irritating if you have GI issues.
So overall, to summarize, should you eat dairy? And the answer is, it depends. If you tolerate it, it absolutely can be a great part of a healthy diet. But if it makes you feel unwell, you may want to reduce or eliminate it or replace it with something like a plant-based dairy product. And also for kids, athletes, pregnant women, older adults, there's often a benefit for including dairy. So something to keep in mind as well. The bottom line is, don't fear dairy, but don't feel forced to eat it either. Hopefully this episode helps you make an informed choice so you can make the decision that's right for you.
Thanks for tuning in, and make sure to head over to our Instagram at Nutrition Digest Podcast, or shoot us an email anytime, nutritiondigestpodcast@gmail.com. We love to hear from you, and share this with someone that you think would benefit.